I was working from home at the time, and at around 8 a.m. I heard a knock at the front door. I just ignored it at first, hoping that whoever it was, they would leave. After a minute of knocking, I opened the door. It was my neighbor, who I had spoken with a few times. My wife was at work at the time, and I could tell he was surprised when I opened the door instead of my wife. He was expecting her to be home and not me. He noticed that I had purchased a new car and asked if I could show it to him. He tried to walk inside, but I asked him to walk around to the garage because of COVID. When I showed him the car, he started acting strange. He always kept one hand in his pocket. My garage is very small, so we were in close proximity to each other. He kept getting closer and closer, which made me uncomfortable. He brought an open Coke bottle filled with a tan liquid and said, "I brought you a Coke." I declined the offer, obviously. After a minute, he asked if he could see my gauge cluster. We walked around to the driver's side and I sat in the driver's seat to turn on the car and show it to him. With the door now opened, there was very little room between the car and the garage wall. After turning on the car, he suddenly pulled a large hunting knife to my neck. I immediately grabbed his wrist and slammed him back into the wall. At this point, we were wrestling between the car and the wall as I tried to get the knife away from him. During this 30-second period, it seemed like an absolute miracle that I wasn't stabbed. The blade grazed past my stomach multiple times. I was eventually able to grab the knife and force him out into the driveway. Immediately after grabbing the knife, he started saying, "What are you doing? I was just trying to show him a knife." And he was acting like I just assaulted him. I was in such a state of shock that I actually started to believe him and wondered if I had overreacted. I know this seems ridiculous in hindsight, but I was completely delusional at the time and didn't know what his intentions were. I stood in the driveway, hands shaking, with 911 dialed on my phone, but I didn't make the call yet. He acted like nothing had just happened and started asking me questions. Really suspicious questions though. Like, "Do you have a security system?" I lied and said yes. I asked him to go home multiple times and eventually I went back inside the house but didn't shut the main garage door for some reason. At this point I needed to drive to work and started getting ready, showering, getting dressed, etc. I assumed he'd just walk back home. After getting ready, I went outside and walked around the house to the garage. I searched around the garage and when I was worried he was still there. As I started getting into my car and leave, I saw my neighbor laying behind some boxes in the garage, staring at me. I yelled and ran as fast as I could back to the front door and called the cops. Cops arrived quickly and my neighbor had disappeared. They searched around his house and mine but could not find him. They said they would stay in the area but were going to leave for now. My house is surrounded by woods and I have a large back porch. Frightened, I stood in the middle of the porch while holding bear mace. I looked around and noticed my neighbor hiding in the woods staring at me. I ran back inside and called the cops. The cops arrived quickly and pulled guns on my neighbor and arrested him. He later said, "I was just trying to scare him." They found a knife, zip ties, vodka, and a note on him that read, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." It was later discovered that the Coke bottle he wanted me to drink contained pesticides. He was there to murder me or my wife. He was charged with 3 felony counts and is currently awaiting trial. I was 17 at the time. I was wicked sick one weekend and my mother decided I needed to go to the hospital. She had been drinking all day as she was a terrible alcoholic. It turned out that I had strep throat. So they are typing out my discharge paperwork and my mother approached the front desk where the nurse was sitting. Clearly stinking of alcohol, the nurse told my mother that she shouldn't be allowed to drive me home because she was clearly intoxicated. They sent my mother into a drunken rage, swearing and threatening the nurse, who told her if she left, the police will be called. My mother grabbed me and hurried me into the car. I start yelling at her about how irresponsible she is and how she is ruining her life with alcohol. This pisses her off even more. We only live less than a mile away, but my mother has taken a different route than normal. When I ask her why, she just says it's the long way and she doesn't want to get caught. As we were traveling down this dark back road surrounded by trees, she begins speeding like crazy. We're doing at least 90 miles per hour when she looks over at me with a blank face and says, "I'm sorry." She then pulled the emergency brake and turned the wheel, sending us flying off the road. The next thing I can remember is sitting in the front seat of a pickup truck with an EMT shining flashlight in my eyes, along with asking me who the president was. I responded that Bill Clinton was the president, as he was at the time. Apparently she had crashed us into a huge rock at the end of someone's property, directly on my side of the car. Apparently I crawled over her and staggered to the door of the property to ask for help. They put us in different ambulances and we headed back to the hospital we just left. Upon arrival, the nurse my mother fought with said, "I knew you'd be back." My mother, in a semi-conscious, drunken state, kept saying, "I'm sorry I tried to kill you, I love you," over and over. She suffered several broken ribs, a broken collarbone, a broken nose and a cracked vertebrae. I had a concussion and some cuts on my face from the door window, basically exploding on impact with the rock. She was sentenced to some alcohol program through the courts and some community service. She suffered severe depression, and 6 months after this all happened, she took her own life in yet another car accident. She actually asked me if I wanted to go for a ride with her that night, and I told her no, I'll see you when you get home. That was the last thing I ever said to her. So we were at a buddy's apartment in college. Over the summer he had sublet to a local tawny guy that turned out to be an absolute nightmare, and he was telling us about it. Amongst many other things, the guy had stolen their roommate's credit cards and ID. Which is strange because they were of different racial ethnicities, so the IDs wouldn't help at all. As he described the guy, we all realized that he was the crazy man we had dealt with walking to the apartment. There had been a dude saying real violent and gross things while walking next to us. About an hour into hanging out, there was a very loud pounding on the door. And the guy starts yelling, "Let me in, now." I know it was you. Apparently, our buddies had called the police on the stolen credit cards and IDs. Rightfully so. The guy was yelling, "Let me in, I'm gonna kill you." And he was pounding on the door so hard that that ball was starting to crack in the door frame. We were juniors in college and my girlfriend and her friends were freshmen. So we all started getting nervous because he had been saying things about rape when we were all walking in. So we called the police, but it was a weekend night in a college town, and they told us it could take up to an hour for them to show up. The guy had been pounding and threatening for 10 plus minutes, and it didn't sound like he was gonna stop anytime soon. He clearly knew the door frame was cracking as well, so we pushed all the furniture up against the door. It felt like we were in a movie. It would have been funny if it hadn't been ridiculously terrifying. We were on the second floor of the building, and the girls and one of our buddies were legit trying to build a rope ladder out of sheets to go through a back window. All of a sudden the knocking and yelling stops, and it's quiet for like 2 minutes. Then from upstairs, where a college party had been going on, we heard yelling and banging, and then a bunch of dudes were getting really loud. Then there was a clear sound of someone falling down the stairs, and we heard a loud. Apparently, we found out later that the guy had gone upstairs to an open door party and started groping girls. It took 3 big dudes to push him out the door, and he fell down the stairs, and the loud noise we heard was him hitting the drywall at the stairs end. He left the building after that. Cops showed up 5 minutes later. Apparently upstairs I called the cops too, to realize how dangerous this guy was. College kids were calling cops to come to parties. We had to unstack the furniture to speak with the police, and they knew exactly who we were talking about as soon as we explained what was going on. Unfortunately, they didn't find him that night. He left the building, stole our buddy's car, then stalked, kidnapped, raped, murdered, and burned the body of a 19-year-old student that night. He wasn't exaggerating when he was yelling he would kill us or saying he wanted to rape the girls. They caught him because he continued trying to use our buddy's credit cards. We found out that later in prison he raped and murdered a female correctional officer who was transferring him out of solitary confinement. The dude was a killer and had us concerned. I'm glad that we stacked the furniture up against the door. It creeps me out to think about how close it came to a face-to-face confrontation with a literal crazed killer.